Alright, forget all the nice things that I said about DreamWorks in the last video, and basically any previous videos. Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about some animation. Now, admittedly, most of the compliments I've given DreamWorks in the past definitely do still hold up, I think, especially anything having to do with individual projects. So whenever I talk about a big studio, I'm never talking about the artists who are actually working on the movies. Technically, they're all part of the same entity, but really, my studio talk, and most of it's going to be negative most of the time, I think. It's all about the brand and the business, that side of things. And just in case the internet hasn't said this enough already, the creativity and the artistry of big Hollywood movies, when it does appear, it doesn't bleed over into how a studio is run as much as branding tries to convince us that it might. So we can think of the studio as a big apartment building, and a good movie is just like an eccentric tenant who might stick around for 5 years, or they might move out next week. I'm deeply troubled by the news of DreamWorks' live-action remake of How to Train Your Dragon. Did I say drain by accident? How to Train Your Dragon. I missed the trailer when it first got posted. I didn't see the social media reactions. I'm sure there are plenty of reactions by now. But basically my friend had to text me from the movie theater to let me know that this was happening. And at the time of writing, it's only been just a teaser so far, set for a 2025 release. Thinking of something positive to say about it, I don't really begrudge anyone who's working on this new movie, or this new old movie, as it may be. You know, good for them. It's paying work, and it usually pays pretty well. But everything else I have to say is negative. I doubt there's anybody watching this video who isn't a fan of animation, but just in case, I want to lay out once and for all why lots of animation fans, myself included, really despise even just the premise of live action remakes of well-known animated projects. So first of all, there's the logical kind of level-headed part of it, which is mainly that animation and live action filmmaking are practically two different mediums. Like, yes, they've paralleled each other quite a bit, and they do exist in the same venues and the same formats usually, but they have very different histories, different production processes, and even different cultural statuses. And maybe most important of all, animation has distinct guiding principles derived from its history and its technical limitations and opportunities. And those principles have been well defined. It's not like a subject for debate. Historically, animation has thrived as an art of exaggeration. Characters, movements, and the settings can all be something other than lifelike. And that's great. That's kind of what appeals to me about the whole concept. And on its own, CG animation is totally capable of doing all these things. You know, it's not an argument of CG versus traditional animation at all. But when CG animation has to exist within a photorealistic movie that's full of human actors, it's no longer allowed to do the things that generally make animation interesting. If they did do those things, it would just break the style completely. A contrast with real life would only work if the whole point of the cartoon characters in a live-action movie was to look outrageously cartoony. That could be a whole movie, come to think of it. I wonder if anybody's done that before. And the less rational, more emotional sticking point of live-action remakes, redos of animated projects is that the mere existence of a live-action remake of anything that was originally animated and celebrated in its animated form is that it feels unnecessary and even disrespectful. So we know that live-action remakes are meant for general audiences, the widest, broadest audiences possible. More so than any average project, they are meant to make very large amounts of money from existing fans and newcomers alike, and that is more true now than in any previous moment in history. And if we're being honest, it's really because of The Lion King. When you're analyzing trends in studio filmmaking, it's easy to make it more complicated than it probably needs to be. All you have to do is look at the most successful projects in recent years, just like the top 3% in terms of moneymakers. Only the biggest successes lead to imitation. And that's because every single studio wants the biggest success. They want the most money. And I don't think that's a cynical take. I think that's just the state of things. Infinity War was a landmark hit, so, let's get our cinematic universe going. Let's start using the term cinematic universe. Or a really bland remake of The Lion King made $1 billion with a B. Let's just do that. What's the closest thing we have to The Lion King? And there you go. How to Train Your Dragon again. Now, it does have the same director as the original trilogy, so we're not supposed to worry too much, but to be honest, I'm worried. And just to add another tangent to the mix, in terms of aesthetics, this all feels comparable to me to the long-standing push in video games to approach photorealistic graphics, and it's one of those things where it feels like everybody on either side of the debate can't possibly be convinced otherwise. Some people feel that the best graphics are the most photorealistic for their time. Other people feel that the best graphics are just the ones that are the most pleasant or interesting to look at, regardless of the accompanying tech or alignment with, the boring real world. And as has been repeated many times, it's generally the less realistic graphics that have any chance of aging well, whereas photorealistic graphics can only ever look their best when they're brand new. So, when they start to look ugly later on, someone has to chime in with, well, for the time, this was really impressive. And given the direct connection between video game graphics and, CG effects, CG animation, and live action movies, I just have to assume that live action remakes of animated movies will have exactly the same fate 10 or 20 or 80 years down the road. But again, the long-term cultural status of a movie is not a factor in these business decisions. The only factor that matters really in this decision is this franchise has enough brand recognition to possibly gross $1 billion at a time when DreamWorks is having a prolonged and very public identity crisis. And the personal frustration with this whole situation is that I really thought the DreamWorks evolution was to turn out movies with really standout visuals and animation. And I do admit that even if this live action remake thing ends up being a decade-long pivot for them, it's still possible for them to continue making really impressive animated movies. It's not one or the other. They're not mutually exclusive. But depending on what makes more money, one of those will likely overtake the other as the focal point of the entire studio. And at least right now, I do feel fairly certain that their live action efforts are going to do well. I still don't know why. I don't know why any of the live action remakes from any studio perform well. I honestly don't get it. Maybe someone should explain it to me. But there have been enough success stories to prove that it's a very strong possibility, and clearly DreamWorks' financial and executive teams feel the exact same way. I recognize that this is really nothing but a rant, and I know that the opinions of random fans couldn't possibly be of interest to studio decision makers unless those opinions happen to put a really sizable dent in their expected earnings. But I feel the need to express it anyway, and maybe that's just YouTube in a nutshell. It just feels like a turning point, almost like a national election where you look at it and go, all right, things are just going to be miserably worse for a while. And that is cynical, but it's also my genuine initial reaction to yet another instance of one of my least favorite Hollywood trends. It just feels like the disease is spreading. I would like to say that I'm reserving judgment until this movie actually releases, but I don't think that's actually true. This is a known quantity. In a best case scenario, the movie will be basically as good as the original, in which case it's going to be redundant. If you can think of a reason for me to be optimistic about the How to Train Your Dragon live action remake, please let me know. But right now I'm fresh out of ideas. Maybe somehow these remakes are good for animation, even if only to show that, you know, new successful animated movies are needed just to supply studios with sources for wildly even more successful live action remakes of those same movies in the future. Thank you so much for watching the entire video. As always, feel free to share your thoughts. I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. In fact, I'm going to record the next one right now. All right, thanks for stopping by.